Hey, it's Rob and welcome to Axel's Garage. We are working on this Chevy P30 step van, bread truck, whatever you want to call it. It's set up as a food truck, and it's got a small block Chevy in it. It's probably a 350, it could be a 305. I don't even know. I don't even care. It doesn't matter. Drives about 2.5 miles a day, and in a previous video, I'll link it up here, we started having some starter issues. Now the starter on this truck went about 2 years ago. Threw a starter in it that I had on the shelf from one of the Chevelles, and it was running fine, starting fine. Then one day we go in and the starter gear is banging into the flywheel, and we just assumed it was a bad starter. Went over to the local big box parts store and picked up a starter, threw it in, same bang. But when we were changing the starters, we did notice a crack on the ear, and I showed that in the video previously. The outer ear on the small block Chevy, where they are, it's not unheard of. It doesn't happen that often, but it's not unheard of. So it is something that does happen. Not a common problem, but not an unheard of problem is what I'm trying to say. That ear cracked. So what was happening was the starter wasn't bad. It was that because there was a crack where the second bolt went through on the outside, it allowed the starter just to move a little bit. And sometimes you'd bolt it up and the gear would line up and it would start up, and then from starting it would just cock the starter a little bit, and that would cause either the gear to miss the flywheel, grind against the flywheel, or smash into the flywheel depending on how it turned. So what did we do? Well, we put a rear bracket on the starter to try to shore it up a little bit better, and that did help a little bit. So we'd bolt that starter up, and sometimes we get one start out of it before we had to go underneath and loosen it, then bolt it up again, and it seemed to align it fairly well. It's just that it wouldn't stay aligned. And sometimes we'd get 3, 4, 5 starts in a row out of it, which was pretty good. Other times we'd just get one. But the fix was that we had to crawl under it with the cordless impact, just loosen it so that it came down a little bit, and then tighten it back up, not make it too tight. It seemed like when we really tightened it down to try to keep it from moving, it automatically misaligned it by over tightening. So we just had to just until the impact stopped, and that was it. So kind of like a loose bolt up actually worked better. And the longest I think I got was 6 starts in a row, which was 3 days work with this truck. But in the meantime, we ordered a kit to try to fix it. Now this kit, and I'll show you the kit here, pretty interesting. All right, it's from Dan Chuck, which is an American company. This is made in the USA, right on it. Dan Chuck, I knew the name Dan Chuck. There is another company that makes one. It's a no-name, and it looks just as good. I don't have any experience with it, and I couldn't really do a lot of research with it online because there was no company information. So I went with the Dan Chuck. They were pretty similarly priced. The Dan Chuck kit might not come with all the hardware that we need. The other kit does. I went with the Dan Chuck because I knew the name, and I knew if I had a problem I could probably return it. So what this kit does, and let me take it out completely for you. Alright, so what this kit does is it gives you this plate. So if you're looking at the engine from behind, almost like it would be in the vehicle here, this being the passenger side, alright, you're going to separate the transmission back from the engine, and you're going to slide this in. Your flywheel is going to be on this side, I would assume. You're going to slide this in place, and you're going to sandwich this in between the engine and transmission, and that is going to give you this. And this is going to be your starter mounting for an early 3-bolt starter. So you got these studs that you're going to thread in and put some Loctite on. These are just loosely, I turn them in place, and you're going to put your starter in through here, the 3-bolt old school Chevy starters, and then you're going to bolt your starter up that way, and that gives you a mounting surface for your starter instead of having to mount it up into the block where the damage is. So you'll be able to mount it in this way. Your flywheel is going to come down through here in this hole, and the gear is going to come out, and that's where it's going to engage the flywheel. The kit, this particular kit, also comes with a flywheel or a torque converter, flywheel / torque converter adapter piece. And what they want you to do is to put your flywheel up and put this up and then bolt your flywheel up. This is not going to be used in the situation that we have here, because this kit was designed to take like a 55, 56, 57 Chevy with a factory original engine that didn't have the new style starter that bolts up to the block, that had the old 3-bolt starters, and those 3-bolt starters bolted to the cast iron bell housing of the transmission. So what this kit was designed for was to be able to put a later model transmission that doesn't have provisions for starter mounting in an early block where the block doesn't have provisions for starter mounting. So you would use this to mount your starter. A secondary use for this kit is to fix the problem that we have here. So I went online, did some Googling, and not a lot of people chiming in. I did get some keyboard commandos who said, why don't you just fix it the right way? You fix it the right way? Really? You know, it's a lot of work. Just fix it the right way. It's easier. Well, fixing it the right way is changing your block. So to me, that ain't easy. Imagine the pain in the ass trying to get an engine block out the side door of this bread truck or box truck or step van, whatever you want to call it. So we apparently we don't have to use this piece here because our flywheel is staying where it is. It doesn't appear to be damaged. We'll see. We are going to have to move the transmission back just off the dowel pins in order to slip this plate in. So what's my plan of action for this? So I'm by myself today. The two dummies are working. So it's going to be a lot of crawling under and back out and under and back out, which is really going to suck. But so we're going to have to separate the engine from the transmission. We need to get a 3/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more, maybe half an inch. We need to separate it to slip this in and get it off the dowels at the same time. So we're going to put a floor jack, and that's the dog hitting the tripod. We're going to put a floor jack under the engine with a 2x4. So we'll take the 2x4 across the oil pan, and we're going to bring the floor jack up to it, and this is just to disperse the weight across the oil pan so we're not dinging up our oil pan. And all it is just to hold the engine in place, because when we unbolt that transmission, the engine's going to want to tilt back. We don't know if we want it to tilt back yet, so we want to leave it where it is. So we're just going to apply just a little bit of pressure to the bottom of the oil pan, just so that it sits and it doesn't move, and all we're doing is just a little bit of pressure. We're not trying to crank it up there. And then we're going to put a jack under the transmission pan. We're going to use a tranny jack under the transmission pan, and we're going to start unbolting. Hopefully we have enough slack in the cooling lines where we don't need to take the cooling lines off. If we do, we do. Linkage side, it's real sloppy, the linkage, so we might have enough slack in there. And then the drive shaft, this is a 2-piece drive shaft with a hanger bearing. We might just need to take that hanger bearing down, and that might give us enough slop in the drive shaft. Then we'll unbolt the tranny at the tranny mount and hopefully be able to bring that tranny back a little bit. I think the tranny bolts are going to be really easy to get at in this, because we got a doghouse on the inside, and you pretty much get the back of the block and the front of the transmission from the inside of the vehicle, and that should actually give us some light going down below. So I'm going to get set up, and then I'll bring you along and show you what I find. Alright, so after about an hour and a half of rusty bolts, everything rusty, I'll show you what we got underneath. I'm going to take the mic off the camera so I don't get it full of grease, and so excuse any shitty audio, and we'll show you what we got underneath. Okay, we started in the back, removing the, well, just unbolting the hanger for the hanger bearing. You can see it's actually pretty corded up, but being that I don't go over 20 miles an hour or so, that really doesn't matter. But hopefully with that hanging down, we'll be able to, that's where the slip yoke is in the drive shaft. We'll have enough play to slide the transmission back to half inch or so that we have to, without taking the drive shaft down completely. Alright, the next step was getting this transmission cross member unbolted. It bolts up over here, here, and here. These bolts are bolts on the bottom of the chassis rail and on the top. Those bolts were rusted up pretty good. None of them snapped with the impact, believe it or not, but the bottom bolts were a little smaller. I guess they were 3/8 bolts on the bottom, and they were the next size up on the top, I guess, because I had to use like a 5/8 and an 11/16 on the top, and they were 9/16 on both sides for the tool on the bottom. I thought they were going to snap for sure. None of them snapped, even with the impact. Then we disconnected the transmission mount. We jacked up the transmission just a little bit and was able to slide the cross member back. And now we got the transmission sitting just down a little bit on the transmission jack. Then I'll crawl up to the front. Alright, so up front we have our torque converter unbolted from the flywheel. We took the old starter out, and when we were taking the old starter out, that chip that was on the broken tab, just move around a little bit, hang on. There's our broken tab. Now that tab was there. I actually have it in my hand. Alright, so this tab was hanging out like this. And when we started, it was pretty tight to the block. So when we initially replaced the starter, I saw the crack, but it was tight to the block. And from constant retightening and starting the vehicle and retightening and starting the vehicle, it started to grow out like that. And when we took the starter down just now, it cracked the rest of the way and came tumbling down. So there it is. Alright, so that's that tab that breaks. The other starter hole is here because this is the offset style Chevy starter, or you had it there, which is the straight across style Chevy starter. Some blocks are drilled for both, some aren't. This one's only appears to be only drilled for the offset. Either way, that outer one needs to be there, and we no longer have it. So now our plate is supposed to mount in between the flywheel and the block. That looks to be close to a ½ inch, maybe 5/8 of an inch. So we're going to close that gap up by 1/4 of an inch. Hopefully our flywheel is not all bent or twisted, which is going to interfere. It shouldn't. And now we have to try to separate the transmission from the engine. It looks like we're going to have to get the 2 bottom bolts from down here, and the rest of the ones we should be able to get from the doghouse. None of this has ever been apart before. This is an 85. Everything's rusted. You would think, you could see the rust everywhere. You would think this truck was in Pittsburgh its whole life. It's just completely rotted. Alright, so now we're up top in the truck, in the side door. Let me bring it back as we're coming in. So we're in the side door on the doghouse. You can see we should be able to get those top 2 on either side. Should come out pretty easy from up top, and then we'll have to get the other ones from the bottom. So hopefully I was able to give you a good idea of what was going on down there. My next step is going to be to unbolt the transmission and see if I can separate it, that ½ inch that we need to separate, without having to disconnect the linkage and the cool lines. If I got to do that, I'll do that, and I'll let you know as I go. I am just covered in rust. I have rust down my shirt, all around. You know, working on the asphalt, crawling back and forth. It's just an uncomfortable, miserable job to do. I'm sure if we had a lift or a regular car that you could lift up, maybe work on a creeper or something. We don't have that luxury. This thing weighs like 14,000 pounds. We're doing it in the driveway, and it just sucks laying on the floor. And so you can't just slide under the truck. There's steps and there's things in the way and tanks, and so you got to sort of like wiggle your way under every time you go under. It's not just get on the ground and slide under the way you got to be. You're always wiggling somewhere. Sucks. We'll be back. Alright, so after removing the transmission bolts, the transmission just came back on its own, because I had the engine jacked a little bit, the transmission jacked a little bit, and it kind of slid back all on its own. Gave me a good inch of clearance, but we found our first issue. And it's not a big issue, I'll show you. You can see the transmission came back a good inch or so. Once I unbolted it, it didn't evenly come back. The right side actually came out, and the left side was in a little bit, and I put a little pry bar in there and moved it back. It's on the transmission jack. The oil pan, it's got a piece of wood across it, and it's jacked up, so everything's supported, and it slid back nice and easy. Our problem is going to be the dowels, and I'll show you. Dowels are important for keeping the transmission on the back of the engine and not just held in by those mounts. It needs to locate it properly. So here's the dowel pins. There's one on either side. All right, you can see there's not a whole lot of meat before the shoulder. That's the shoulder of the dowel, and then that's the main dowel. So once we put a 1/4 inch spacer on there, those dowels are barely going to be popping out. So it looks like we're going to have to pop them out, which should be fun. Got to sort of hit them from the back, the front of the engine, and pop them out this way. Pop them out and put in longer ones. And Moroso does make longer ones. We do have them because there was a thought that that might be an issue. So I do have them. Now we just got to get them out. And once we get them out, then we're at the halfway point. Alright, so another interference problem that you could see right there. So even if the dowels were too long, even with the factory dowels that are too short, you can't slide the plate in because there's not enough room between the end of the dowel and the flex plate, so you can't slide the plate in. So you're going to have to knock the dowels out either way. The only way you wouldn't have to knock the dowels out is if you had taken the flex plate off. But then, again, the dowels are going to be too short. They'd barely just be grabbing the transmission. Definitely not sitting in as far as they should be. So I'm going to have to try to knock these dowels out either way, because that's the only way that plate's going to go in. Alright, well, I forgot to turn the mic on because at this point you could tell from the grime on my back I am just shot. It had to be about 90 degrees and humid that day that we were starting out with this project, and it was just miserable in the driveway. You know, it's an asphalt driveway. It's a little gritty of an asphalt. It's not that smooth. And all the rust coming down from the truck, it was just like sandpaper. Like I was laying in a gravel driveway, sliding in and out. And it was just a miserable day. You could just tell I shouldn't have, short sleeves and shorts shouldn't have been done. The next day I'm going to put long sleeves on. I'm going to tuck my shirt in. I'm going to have long pants on. And even though I'm sweating, at least I'm a little covered from all the grit and grime. Michelle came out, helped me clean off the tools for the day and sort of organize. I kind of knew what tools at that point I needed and what I didn't need to make it a little easier for the next day. But I got just about halfway through the project. I continue to clean the tools in the video clip, and then I come out and I talk about what I did for the day. But pretty much I got halfway through. The kit is excellent. I'm going to link it in the description below. If I didn't already say it somewhere in the video, this kit was designed as a retrofit for early cars so that you can have a starter mounting point when you have a block that doesn't have starter mounting provisions and you have a transmission that doesn't have starter mounting provisions. But a good use has become to fix this sort of common, not that common, but not unheard of broken starter mounting tab. And I did reach out on teamchevelle.com to anybody that might have used it, and a guy who has a shop did get in touch with me and said that he has used it several times in the past to do a repair on a customer's vehicle that had the broken starter mounting tab and was able to use it with good success, and that's why I went with it. It's made in USA. I like the kit a lot. Well, after getting everything cleaned up, I guess I walked over. I don't even remember what I was saying here. I walked over to the camera. I spoke a little bit about some kind of gibberish nonsense, probably because I was delirious from the heat. I threw out the clothes I was wearing. The little big dummy, Steve-O, was actually able to clean my hat for me. He's got some method of cleaning hats. And I took a cold shower for about 20 minutes because I was just completely overheated. And the next day was, I believe it was a holiday. It might have been Father's Day the next day. And I went out and I just tinkered around for about 2 hours, kind of got everything buttoned where I needed it to really get the brunt done on day 3. And we'll continue along now on day 3 because I have no idea where I am in the video. It's been so long since I actually shot it and I got to edit it. So enjoy the rest of the video. Well, after the rain from the other day, we just cleaned up the tools, we put them away. I don't even know where we ended the video. My body hurt, and it hurt more from climbing out and under the truck, you know, dozens if not over 100 times to grab something to go back under, and it's just the rust underneath the truck coming down on top of me, getting in my eyes and my ears, and just rolling around and sliding through it was a pain in the ass. So if you have a better work environment, you're doing it on a car, maybe the car's up in the air a little bit, or you're on a lift, it should be much easier. So came back out the next morning, didn't film, but I spent about 2 hours and I was able to slide the plate in between the engine and transmission. The problem that they don't talk about in the directions, because the directions are as if you have the transmission completely removed and the flex plate completely removed, is you can't slide the plate between the flex plate and the engine block because of the dowels. So the passenger side dowel, we actually knocked it all the way out. Driver's side dowel, we couldn't get it to come out because you got to knock them out from the engine side towards the transmission. And we have the exhaust manifold coming down right behind it. There is just no way to get any kind of punch or a hammer in there. I can get a punch, even a really small one or a small bolt, using that as a punch, but I can't get a hammer in there to swing. We tried putting every extension in the toolbox together to bring it all the way out the front of the truck, which we did. Got it sticking out right below the bumper, but it was just too many extensions, making a bow, going in, smacking it with all our effort with a lump hammer, and it was just not enough to get it out. So what I wound up doing was beating it into the engine a little bit more, just enough where we can slide the plate down. So now the plate on the driver's side is over the dowel. The plate on the passenger side, there is no dowel at that point. And what I did was I got the transmission up, sandwiched the plate in between, didn't have the bolts tight, just had them bottomed, and then we took a longer dowel that Moroso makes, and we used that on the passenger side, putting it in from the transmission side, through the transmission, through the plate, into the engine block, and tap that in. That went in fairly easy. I mean, you got to give it some good shots, but it got in there and seated. So we got a good dowel on the passenger side. On the driver's side, we got a dowel that's going out of the engine block into the plate, and maybe just touching the transmission, you know, barely at all. So now we got the whole plate sandwiched down. We tightened up the bolts going to from the transmission to the engine, and I'll show you what it looks like. So you can see right in there, right between the engine and transmission, the plate is in there. So now we got our plate in place, and our next step was the torque converter bolts. So torque converter bolts, the kit did not come with longer bolts, so we had to go get some longer bolts. We used bolts, lock washers, little blue Loctite on the torque converter bolts with a flywheel turner, turned it around, got the torque converter bolts in with the 1/4 inch spacers. They make 1/4 inch spacers that will space the torque converter from the flex plate to make up for that room that the plate is taking up, so that you have your distances are all the same. So once the flex plate's bolted up, you got to deal with the starter. So you buy an early Chevy 3-bolt starter, and this is what the nose cone looks like. They have 3/8 holes here, here, and not here. This one up here, the top one, is threaded. I guess originally a bolt went through and threaded into here, so you have to drill this one out to 3/8, which is fairly easy to do. Just take your time, don't get it bound up in there, and just drill it out to 3/8, and you got 3/8 holes. And now you have to crawl underneath, and you got to put your studs in. So these are the studs that are going to go into the plate, and I'll bring the camera underneath in a second. You can see there's a fine thread and a coarse thread. So your coarse threaded studs are going to go into the mounting plate, and you're going to use some Loctite. They give you Loctite in the kit if you don't have your own Loctite, and you're going to Loctite these in, and you're just going to spin them down by hand until they seat nice on the plate, and that's plenty good, because then when you tighten it down on this end, it's going to reinforce the tightening on this end. So let me bring you up under the truck. Again, if it's windy or anything like that, I apologize. We don't have the mic on the camera because I'm keep moving the camera underneath the truck, and it gets all the windsock gets all greasy from shit under the truck. All right, so on the underside, you can see the spacers in the flex plate, in between the flex plate and the torque converter. Okay, and you can see. I can't see crap. Hopefully you could see it. Let me spot it a little more. and you can see your mounting plate coming down. There's our crack, which we're not going to use those anymore. So we have the 3 holes in the mounting plate where we're going to put the studs in with some Loctite. Alright, so I got the 3 studs installed. I used I tried to spin them in by hand as best as I could, but I was having trouble getting them all the way down, so I used the double nut method and just turned them down by double nutting them and turning it down with a wrench. Just, you know, a little snug into the plate, nothing crazy. And now we can slide the starter on. I'm hoping I got enough clearance right there. I'm a little concerned with the amount of clearance from the starter. I might have to knock off the rest of this crack here. I don't know. That seems really tight, that one up there. Alright, so after making my electrical connections on the back of the starter, we got the starter bolted up. Got our connections back there. The only thing we didn't do is put our bracket on the rear of the starter. But I don't know. Looks like it should work. Alright, well, still no mic, so excuse the wind if there's wind. But we got the starter bolted up. We got the power to the starter. The transmission cross member is just laying in the chassis rails. Transmission is on it. I don't have the mount screwed in on the transmission. I don't have the cross member bolted down. I don't have the hanger bearing bolted down. Shift linkage is not connected, and my vacuum that I had to disconnect going to the transmission is disconnected. I got the air cleaner off because I had to get access into where the vacuum hose went. So everything's still apart, but the meat and potatoes part of this is done. So the starter's bolted up, transmission's bolted up, flex plate's bolted up to the torque converter. I disconnected the coil from the distributor, and I'm going to connect the battery, and we should be able to crank this thing to see how it sounds. I'm afraid. Let me get a wrench and put the battery back. Alright, battery's connected. I'm not feeling pretty. I don't know why. I just... Thank fucking God. Holy shit. Holy shit. Holy shit. Guess I'm working tomorrow. That was the best a starter has ever sounded on this hunk of shit truck. Holy shit. It fucking worked. Holy shit. Holy shit, holy shit. Alright. I gotta put everything back together. I gotta put that bracket on the back of the starter to give it a little extra support. That is a long, heavy starter with that big nose. We're gonna button everything back up, and then I'll give you the ups and the downs of this kit. It seems to have worked. I'm knocking wood on my head. I'm gonna knock wood on the thing here. Holy shit. I can't fucking believe it. Alright, all buttoned up. Got everything put back together. What I thought about the kit? Well, it works. It's a pain in the ass, but it works. It was a bigger pain in the ass because couldn't jack the vehicle. The vehicle sat in one spot. Couldn't get it up on jack stands. It was just tough to work on, rusty, old. If you're doing it on an old muscle car or something like that, it's going to be much easier. Crawling out from under the truck just made it very difficult. So you could do it in a good day on a regular car. You know, if you're doing a Chevy or a Camaro or something like that, and you know, it's a day, 2-day job. I did it in 2 days by myself. Really didn't have any help from anybody for the most part. The boys were working, you know, in the driveway, the worst conditions possible. Hot, rusty, gravelly. The driveway was so gritty. It's so gritty under that truck right now from all the rust that fell down from using the impact and stuff. But it worked. What it didn't have, It didn't have longer dowels, so you need to pick up some longer dowels. Moroso makes them. I'll link them in the description below. Didn't have longer dowels. I needed longer flywheel or flex plate bolts, where the flex plate to torque converter bolts, those needed 1/4 inch longer. The factory ones, you know, with that spacer in there, they really weren't going beyond the welded nut on the torque converter. So I did get new hardware for that. Transmission bolts, you need ones that are about 1/4 inch longer. If you could find them, you might have to go to a 1/2 inch longer, which might be too long, so you got to put a washer and a lock washer. I just used hardened ones that I had that were pretty much the same length, and they were plenty long enough. But other than that, that's really all it was missing was the, for me, the torque converter, the flex plate to torque converter bolts. I like the kit. It's made in the USA. Dan Chuck, I'll link everything in the description below. It works. If you have a broken starter tab, this is definitely a lot more convenient than replacing your engine or trying to weld the rod into the cast iron block, which never works out because it's never in the right spot. And to be honest with you, I've never had a starter sound so good as one of these early 60s starter. If you guys remember those cars when they were, when you come across one that's all original and they start it up, it is like the starter is like silent, and it's odd if you get used to those other ones. So it actually sounds really good. It worked. It did the job we needed it to do, and I am exhausted from doing it. My body hurts just from crawling in and out of the truck, but it works. Hope you enjoyed the video. Comments, questions, concerns, put them down below. I'll answer all your questions. This worked, and I'm happy that it did. Thanks for watching.